The billionaire laughed when he saw the farmer's rusty old truck sitting beside the broken wooden fence. "Is that the vehicle you're using to defend your land?" he said, looking around at the small farm covered in dust and old equipment. "You can barely afford a new truck. How do you think you can fight a billion-dollar company?" The crowd behind him laughed, but the old farmer didn't say a word. He just looked at the ground, because they didn't know what was buried beneath that land. And they had no idea that in just a few hours, every person standing there would realize they had made the biggest mistake of their lives. For 42 years, Samuel Carter had woken up before sunrise. Every morning, while the rest of the town was still asleep, he walked across his small farm, checked the crops, repaired broken fences, and fed the animals his family had raised for generations. It wasn't a rich farm. The barn was old. The tractor had more repaired parts than original ones, and his old blue pickup truck had rust covering almost every corner. People in town joked that the truck was older than some of them. But Samuel didn't care. That truck belonged to his father. It carried his family through storms, hard winters, and the hardest years of his life. To Samuel, it wasn't just a machine. It was a memory. But everything changed when a company called Westbridge Development arrived in town. They came with expensive suits. They wanted to build a massive technology and energy complex across thousands of acres of land. And Samuel's farm sat right in the middle of their plans. The company's CEO, Richard Vail, arrived personally, a man known across the country for turning small towns into business opportunities. He stepped out of a black luxury SUV and looked at Samuel's farm like it was an abandoned piece of land. "Mr. Carter," Richard said. Samuel nodded. "Morning." Richard smiled, but it wasn't friendly. It was the smile of someone who already believed he had won. "We're offering you a generous deal," Richard said. The amount was far less than what the land was worth. "You want my family farm for half its value," Samuel replied. Richard laughed. "Half its value?" He looked around. "Sir, look at this place." He pointed at the old barn. "The roof is falling apart." Then he pointed at the rusty truck. "That thing belongs in a museum." A few workers behind him laughed. Samuel stayed quiet. Richard stepped closer. "Times change, Mr. Carter. Small farms disappear. Big companies create the future." Samuel looked at him. "My family built this farm before your company existed." Richard's smile faded. "And my company can replace it in 1 year." The words hit harder than Samuel expected. Because this wasn't just land. This was the place where his father taught him how to work, where his wife planted flowers before she passed away, where his children took their first steps. This was home. "I'm not selling," Samuel said. The entire group went silent. Richard looked surprised. Then he laughed. "You really think you have a choice?" That sentence stayed in Samuel's mind. Because 3 days later, everything got worse. The company started surrounding the farm. Legal notices arrived. Survey teams entered nearby land. Construction vehicles appeared at the edge of his property. The town began changing. Some neighbors accepted the company's offers. Others were afraid. And suddenly, Samuel became the only person standing in the way. At the local diner, people whispered, "That old man should just take the money. He's fighting a billionaire. He doesn't stand a chance." Samuel heard every word. But he kept working, because he knew something they didn't. Something his father had told him decades ago. Never give away land you don't fully understand. At the time, Samuel thought those words were just advice. But now, he started wondering, what did his father mean? That night, Samuel opened an old wooden box that had been sitting in his attic for years. Inside were old photographs, letters, and a faded envelope. A name was written on the front. Carter Family Land Agreement, 1954. Samuel froze. He had never seen it before. His hands shook as he opened it. Inside was a document covered in old stamps and signatures. It was an agreement between his grandfather and the government. An agreement that protected the land from future corporate takeover. But there was something else. A section Samuel had never heard about. A hidden clause. The land wasn't just farmland. Decades ago, it had been part of a national conservation agreement. The original owners were granted permanent rights because the property protected a rare underground water system, a water source that supplied the entire region. And Westbridge Development's project? It was planned directly above it. Samuel stared at the document. Suddenly everything made sense. The company didn't want his land because it was valuable. They wanted it because it was the only thing stopping them. But there was one problem. The document needed official verification, and the deadline was only days away. The next morning, Samuel drove his old truck toward the county records office. People watched him pass. Some laughed. Others shook their heads. Nobody knew that inside that rusty truck was a document worth more than the entire development project. But when Samuel arrived, everything changed. A government vehicle was already waiting. 2 engineers were standing outside, and they weren't looking at the truck. They were looking at him. "Are you Samuel Carter?" one of them asked. Samuel slowly stepped out. "Yes." The engineer looked shocked. "We've been trying to find you." Samuel frowned. "Why?" The engineer held up a folder. "Because your land agreement may be connected to the largest environmental case in state history." For the first time, Samuel saw fear in someone else's eyes. Not his. Theirs. Within hours, government officials arrived at the farm. Engineers walked across the fields. Experts examined the land. And suddenly the same people who ignored Samuel were treating him differently. News cameras appeared. Reporters asked questions. The town gathered. And Richard Vale? He was furious. He arrived with lawyers and demanded answers. "What is happening here?" he shouted. One government official turned toward him. "Mr. Vale, your company's construction permit is being reviewed." Richard laughed. "You're stopping $1 billion project because of an old farmer's paperwork." The official looked at him. "No." He held up the document. "We're stopping it because your company ignored protected land rights." The crowd went silent. Richard looked at Samuel. "You think this changes anything?" But Samuel didn't answer. Because he didn't need to. The evidence was already speaking. Then the engineers found something. A hidden marker underground. An old boundary stone from 1954. Exactly where the document said it would be. The land agreement was real. And Richard Vale's entire project was built on land he never legally controlled. The billionaire who came to humiliate a farmer was now the one being questioned. But Richard wasn't finished. He launched a final attack. His lawyers claimed Samuel had no proof that his family owned the agreement. They demanded the original signatures be verified. The entire town waited. Because if the signatures were fake, Samuel would lose everything. For 2 days, experts studied the documents, wondering if his father's final lesson had led him here for nothing. Then, the government arrived again. But this time, they weren't investigating. They were there to announce a decision. The official stepped forward. "After reviewing historical records, we have confirmed the Carter family agreement." The crowd held its breath. The land rights are valid. A wave of emotion moved through everyone. Samuel closed his eyes. Not because he won. Because his father was right. The official continued. "Furthermore, the documents reveal that Westbridge Development knowingly ignored protected land regulations." Everyone looked at Richard. For the first time, he had nothing to say. The man who spent years buying companies, controlling markets, and intimidating people, was standing powerless. In front of the same crowd, he tried to impress. His empire had been stopped by an old farmer and a forgotten piece of paper. Weeks later, the town changed. The development project was canceled. The land was protected, and Samuel's farm became something bigger than anyone expected. Not a symbol of wealth. A symbol of standing your ground. People who once laughed at his truck now stopped to shake his hand. Young farmers came to learn from him. Neighbors who doubted him apologized. One evening, Samuel sat beside his old pickup truck watching the sunset. A reporter asked him, "Mr. Carter, why didn't you give up when everyone said you would lose?" Samuel looked at his old truck. Then he smiled. "Because some things are worth more than money." The reporter asked, "Like what?" Samuel looked across his farm. "Family." The wind moved through the fields. The same fields everyone thought were worthless. The same fields that nearly destroyed a billionaire's dream. And the old farmer's rusty truck remained exactly where it had always been. Not broken. Not useless. A reminder that sometimes, the person everyone underestimates is the one person standing between power and the truth.